Hi, everybody. Welcome to another pastor study. This week we had Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. There's several interesting sort of crossing patterns that kind of came about to uh, structure the sermon the way I did. But one of the things that I left out was the previous week we had our Wednesday night Zoom Bible study, and we were talking about James chapter 4, I think. Yeah, verses 13 to the end, where James is talking about, come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. Talking about this balance between action and not necessarily inaction, but following God's plan, and it's that along with Psalm 127. It sort of brings about this tension that we have to live in, whether or not we act and do something, or we wait because God says it isn't time yet. And this is one that I live in really daily because uh, I'm an act guy. I want it to be done. I want it to be done now. I want it to be done well. I want it to be done quickly. Things typically don't work that way. But I want to go. In the Bible study, I brought up the story from 1 Samuel 14 with Jonathan and his armor bearer. It's a story I've heard. It's one of those stories that has come into my life in several different ways throughout my life, kind of at key moments. And it's one that I reflect on a lot because I would tend to act this way, but oftentimes that's not the right way to act. But sometimes it is, and that's the tension. So the story is this: the Philistines are oppressing the nation of Israel, and Saul is king. Jonathan, his son, prince, they're leading the army. But the Philistines have taken away all the weapons in the nation of Israel, and they've gotten rid of the blacksmiths, so they can't build more weapons. So you've got this army of 600 people, and they're hiding out in this pomegranate cave. And the only people in the entire army that have swords are Saul and Jonathan. Everybody else, they've sharpened an axe. They've got a plow. They've got a pitchfork, whatever they can come up with. But they're all in this cave, staring at this priest who has this ephod, which is sort of a prophetic robe that's generally worn in times of seeking. What do we do? So they're all in this cave, the pomegranate cave, staring at this guy with the ephod. And Jonathan says, I'm sick of this. I'm tired of sitting. Let's do something. And so he grabs his armor bearer. They decide they're going to go poke the Philistines a little bit. And so they go off to confront them. And nobody notices and nobody stops them. So the entire nation is so frozen in this sense of what do we do next, that half of the swords in the entire army leave and they don't notice. And so Jonathan says, we're going to do this. And if the Philistines respond in a certain way, we know God is going to be with us. If they don't, we know God isn't, and we're going to leave. And they respond the way that they said that they would respond if God was with them. They go up and they fight this battle. They have this great victory where these two guys defeat an entire group of soldiers, and it lifts the spirits of Israel, and it causes them to go and win a victory against the Philistines. But it's this balance between, do we act or do we not act? And Jonathan says, I'm tired of sitting here doing nothing. We're going to go do something. The key in that is that he does it in the power of God, and he's relying on God to bring him through. But you have this tension. When is it me just acting to act, and when is it me saying, I'm going to trust that God is going to be with us? When is it a plan that is not in vain, as it says in James. Today or tomorrow, I'm going to go to such and such a town and spend a year there, trade and make for a profit. When am I doing that? Saying, if the Lord wills it. And when am I doing that? Saying, because this is what I'm going to do regardless. There's a tension there. There's a difficulty there in taking some time at the very least, even in rush moments, even in time compressed situations, taking the time to focus and say, am I doing this in my power and by my will, or am I doing it in the power of God and by his will? Because if I'm doing it in my power and my will, I'm laboring in vain, as the psalm says. But there is a tension there. There are some people who are going to tend to say, we need to pray about this more, we need to pray about this more, we need to pray about this more, and never act. And they're absolutely right. We need to pray about especially big decisions, but any decisions. We need to be working in the will of God through prayer, through seeking his will, and all needs to be focused on that. But we also have to know if our tendency is towards inaction and saying, I'm going to pray forever and I'm never going to act, like the nation of Israel is doing in this story with Jonathan and the armor bearer, or if it's acting too swiftly and not seeking the will of God, like the laborer who builds the house in vain, like the businessman who says that we're going to go into this town and spend a year there and make money. If it's not in the will of God, if it's not trusting God to guide that process, it's going to be worthless. It's going to be in vain, and we're going to fail. We need to be constantly seeking the will of God and find that balance between time of prayer, time of focus, time of seeking, and then time of action. I said in the sermon, we've been trying to walk that line at our church for several years, looking at our building situation. We feel like we've done well, and we feel like where we're at now is a blessing that God has brought us to because of that process for the last several years. Now, where we're at now, this week could be completely different than next week. Next week, everything could change. We don't know. We know that God has brought us to today, Tuesday, August 4th, 2020. I don't know what he has in store for Tuesday or for Wednesday, August 5th. But I trust that he's going to take care of what we need to do today, and he's going to take care of what we're going to do tomorrow and next week and next month, and each step along the way. We need to trust that his will is going to be done in what we do. And that's the choice that we have there in verse 2 that I said was really sort of the key for us in this passage. Are we going to eat the bread of anxious toil? Are we going to not enjoy our food, our work, our life because we're dealing with anxiety and stress over what's happening and what's in control? Or are we going to rest in the peaceful sleep that God grants us when we are trusting him moment by moment, day by day? That's the key. That's what we have to focus on. It's really, like I said, the center of this lesson. Are we trusting God, or are we trying to do it in our own power? And our own power isn't going to work. Maybe one other brief note. The second half of this psalm, verses 3 to 5, again, it's sort of an odd pairing with the first half, except when you look at it from the perspective that what he's doing here is he's covering, really the center of the human experience: shelter, in building the house, safety, and watching over the city. So, sort of our day-to-day life and rest and eating, and then family. I treat passages like this carefully because I know as human beings, we tend to look at the majority, and oftentimes we can miss the minority. And in a passage like this, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. We need to not just recognize that is really a proverb that is true by and large, but there are those who don't experience that reward, don't experience that blessing. And it's not because of God's judgment on them, and it's not because there's something wrong with them. For whatever reason, God has said to a couple, to families, that you're not going to have biological kids. That's extraordinarily painful for people, whether they've gone through miscarriages, whether they can't even get pregnant. Maybe they desperately want to be married and in a family, and they, for whatever reason, God doesn't bring a partner for them. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. And we need to recognize as a church that is an intensely painful thing that oftentimes from the outside we don't see until we really get into an individual's life, and then we see how much pain is there. So while we also want to say this is absolutely true, the children are a blessing by God, we also have to recognize that there are those who don't experience that blessing, at least in the way that most do. As I mentioned in the sermon, there are other options for those people. I've seen, I know some people who don't have children that are the biggest, most powerful blessing to kids that I've ever seen. A couple friends in particular, that even though they don't have kids on their own, they are mentoring sometimes dozens of kids. They're getting into their lives. They're helping them grow and develop and live out Christ-like characteristics. Those people are just as much a mom and dad to those kids sometimes as a biological parent. There's adoption. I'm just constantly blown away by people that are in my life that just keep adopting, because there are all these kids that need a family like that. And it's an incredible blessing, and it's an incredible calling to those who are in that. So we want to, as a church, we should be sensitive to those situations, and we should be encouraging and uplifting, and not just ignore that, not just forget that that's a significant thing. There are people that Mother's Day, Father's Day are a couple of the most difficult days of the year. Those people need to be encouraged and lifted up. So that's kind of how I approach that passage. For whatever reason, that the Lord sort of brought in my heart that this is one that is worth being sensitive to. But it doesn't change the fact that children are a blessing from God. They're difficult. They're a struggle to deal with, to raise. But at the end of the day, they're just some of the best parts of life, and some of us experience that different than others, and we should recognize that and celebrate that and encourage those who are going through those difficult times. So that's Psalm 127. Interesting passage, one that, again, for me personally is a challenge. I want to act, but sometimes the right thing to do is to stop and to say, I want this to happen, but not my will, but God's be done. And we're going to wait until he says it's time to move. I hope we do that. We're better off if we do. Next week, Psalm 130. We've got 4 more Psalms, Lord willing, to the end of the series, unless I change my mind, which I reserve the right to do at any moment. But looking forward to them. God bless you all. Have a great week. See ya.